There is one food that doctors specializing in cancer prevention keep coming back to, year after year, study after study. And it is sitting in almost every kitchen on the planet right now, usually treated as nothing more than a base for pasta sauce or a slice tossed into a sandwich without much thought. The tomato does something inside the human body that very few foods can match. It cuts off the blood supply that tumors depend on to grow. It activates the body's own DNA repair machinery before damaged cells have a chance to turn dangerous. And it does all of this through a single compound that only becomes fully available once the tomato has actually been cooked, which happens to be the exact opposite of what most general nutrition advice tells people about vegetables and fruit. The compound responsible for nearly everything remarkable about tomatoes is called lycopene. It is the pigment that gives tomatoes their deep red color, and it belongs to a family of compounds called carotenoids, the same broad family that gives carrots their orange color. Lycopene happens to be one of the most potent antioxidants identified anywhere in the human diet, with an antioxidant capacity that, in laboratory measurements, actually exceeds that of both vitamin C and vitamin E individually. Antioxidants matter because they neutralize unstable molecules called free radicals before those molecules damage DNA, cell membranes, and the proteins that keep cells functioning correctly. Left unchecked over time, this kind of cellular damage accumulates across years and decades, and it is one of the central underlying mechanisms behind both ordinary aging and the early molecular development of cancer. What makes lycopene particularly significant in cancer research is its well-documented effect on angiogenesis, the process by which tumors grow their own blood supply. A tumor smaller than roughly 1 to 2 millimeters cannot grow further without recruiting new blood vessels to feed it. This single biological bottleneck is one of the most important vulnerabilities in cancer biology, and it is exactly where lycopene appears to intervene. Research has repeatedly shown that lycopene inhibits the signaling molecules tumors rely on to recruit blood vessels, effectively starving small, dormant, cancerous growths before they expand. Research published in cancer prevention journals has specifically linked higher dietary lycopene intake to reduced angiogenic activity within prostate tissue, which is a significant part of why tomatoes have become one of the most heavily studied foods in prostate cancer prevention research over the past 2 decades. The DNA repair mechanism connected to lycopene works through a related but distinct pathway. Every cell in the human body sustains DNA damage constantly from sunlight, from normal metabolic processes, and from environmental exposures encountered through food, air, and water. The body maintains a system dedicated to identifying and correcting this damage before it accumulates into mutations that drive cancer development. Lycopene has been shown across multiple studies to measurably reduce oxidative DNA damage in human cells, and some research suggests it may also support the enzymes directly responsible for the repair process itself. One study following men with early-stage prostate cancer found that those who consumed tomato products regularly showed measurably reduced markers of oxidative DNA damage compared with those who did not, alongside slower disease progression markers tracked throughout the study. Here is the detail that genuinely surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Raw tomatoes contain lycopene, but the body absorbs only a small fraction of it in raw form, because lycopene remains tightly bound within the rigid plant cell walls of raw tomato flesh. Cooking breaks down those cell walls through heat, releasing the lycopene and making it dramatically more bioavailable. Research comparing raw versus cooked tomato consumption has found that cooking can increase lycopene bioavailability by several times over the raw form. This is one of the rare cases in nutrition where cooking a food makes it meaningfully more protective. Adding even a modest amount of olive oil during cooking compounds this effect further, since lycopene is fat-soluble and requires dietary fat to be properly absorbed through the intestinal wall. A tomato sauce simmered with olive oil is, from a pure bioavailability standpoint, one of the most effective ways to deliver this compound into circulation. Tomato-based products specifically have been the subject of some of the most consistent findings across this area of nutrition research. Studies on tomato sauce, tomato paste, and cooked tomato dishes have repeatedly shown higher blood lycopene levels among regular consumers of these cooked forms, compared with people who mostly eat tomatoes raw, sliced into salads. Processed tomato products like paste and sauce, often unfairly dismissed in general nutrition advice because of concerns around added sugar or sodium in certain commercial versions, actually contain some of the highest concentrations of bioavailable lycopene found in any tomato product, provided they are chosen carefully or made at home without excessive added sugar. Beyond the cancer-related mechanisms, lycopene also supports cardiovascular health through a related anti-inflammatory pathway. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the central drivers of arterial damage that eventually leads to heart disease over time. Lycopene has been shown across multiple clinical studies to reduce markers of this inflammation, including C-reactive protein, while supporting healthier cholesterol particle behavior, specifically reducing oxidation of LDL cholesterol, a process considered more dangerous to arterial walls than raw LDL levels alone. A meta-analysis combining multiple clinical trials found that regular tomato consumption, or lycopene supplementation, was associated with measurable improvements in arterial health markers alongside better blood pressure regulation. There is also a meaningful immune connection that receives far less attention than the cancer and cardiovascular research, despite being equally documented. Lycopene appears to modulate immune cell activity in ways that help the body distinguish between genuine threats requiring an inflammatory response and harmless triggers that do not warrant one. Chronic immune overactivation is increasingly understood as a contributing factor in a wide range of modern health conditions. Some research suggests consistent lycopene intake helps calibrate this immune response toward a more measured baseline. The practical takeaway is refreshingly simple, given how complex the underlying biology is. Cooked tomato dishes, a simmered sauce, a soup, a stew, using tomato as a base, deliver meaningfully more usable lycopene than raw tomato slices in a salad. Adding olive oil during cooking further increases how much the body absorbs. Tomato paste and well-made tomato sauce, often unfairly dismissed as processed food, are among the most concentrated and bioavailable sources of one of the most thoroughly researched cancer protective compounds in nutritional science. None of this requires giving up raw tomatoes entirely, since they still offer meaningful fiber, vitamin C, and potassium. It simply means a tomato sauce simmered with olive oil, eaten consistently as part of a normal diet, is quietly doing something significant at the cellular level, supporting the body's defenses against cancer, protecting DNA from oxidative damage, and reducing inflammatory load on the cardiovascular system, one meal at a time. There is also something worth mentioning about how widely available and inexpensive this protective compound is compared to many things marketed as superfoods. A jar of crushed tomatoes costs a fraction of what trending wellness products charge for a smaller, far less research benefit. Tomatoes have been part of cuisines across the Mediterranean for generations, long before any of this biochemistry was understood, and populations building tomato-based cooking into their everyday meals have been studied for their comparatively lower rates of certain chronic diseases. There is one more practical consideration worth addressing, because it tends to come up the moment people think about adding more cooked tomato into a weekly routine. Concerns about acidity, particularly for anyone with acid reflux or a sensitive stomach, are understandable. For most people without a diagnosed digestive condition, well-cooked tomato sauce, especially balanced with olive oil and eaten alongside other foods, tends to be gentler than large amounts of raw tomato. The cooking process softens some of the more irritating acids while making protective compounds more available, meaning the version that delivers the most lycopene also tends to be easier to digest. For anyone with a specific medical condition, checking with a physician before making significant dietary changes remains the sensible approach. This raises a fair question worth addressing honestly. If lycopene is this beneficial, would taking a concentrated supplement achieve the same result more efficiently than cooking tomatoes at home? The research here is more nuanced than supplement marketing suggests. Several large clinical trials testing isolated lycopene supplements against whole tomato products found that whole food sources tend to outperform isolated supplements on measurable health outcomes, despite supplements often containing higher concentrated doses on paper. Researchers believe this happens because tomatoes contain dozens of additional compounds working alongside lycopene, other carotenoids, flavonoids, and vitamin C interacting synergistically in ways an isolated supplement cannot replicate. This does not mean lycopene supplements have no value, particularly for people who cannot or will not eat tomato products regularly. It does mean that, for most people, most of the time, a jar of good tomato sauce simmered with olive oil likely delivers more genuine benefit than money spent on a supplement bottle. Building this into a weekly routine does not require a dramatic overhaul of how anyone already cooks. A homemade tomato sauce simmered for 20 to 30 minutes with olive oil, garlic, and basic seasoning Used as a base for pasta, a topping for roasted vegetables, or a foundation for soup, accomplishes the bulk of what this video has described. Store-bought tomato paste or passata, chosen with an eye toward avoiding excessive added sugar, works as a reasonable shortcut on busier weeks. Even roasting halved tomatoes with olive oil for 30 minutes accomplishes much of the same cellular breakdown that unlocks lycopene, while adding a depth of flavor raw tomatoes rarely achieve. None of this needs to be a rigid protocol. It works far better as a quiet, consistent habit woven into meals that already exist. If this changed how you think about something already sitting in your pantry right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Your Body Decoded. Next week, we go even deeper inside the biology of what your everyday food is actually doing to your body, and what we uncover next time will likely change how you shop for groceries from this point forward.